Some critics will argue that actually we can never understand what Shakespeare's true beliefs were because there are simply too many characters in his plays, and it's impossible for us to work out which characters hold his beliefs and which characters are simply creations to show other people's beliefs or to provide drama on stage. So if we take that view, we could argue that Shakespeare is actually just interested in putting bums on seats in the theatre and making money. And when he can't make money from the theatre, he's going to make money out of the patronage of the king. It's purely a business arrangement. So in their first winter season between December 1603 and February 1604, the king's players performed 8 times at court, that means for the king, and 11 times in their second from November 1604 through to February 1605. So you can see how important it was to Shakespeare and the king's players to perform for the king. That's where they were earning most of their money, including 7 plays by Shakespeare and 2 by Ben Jonson, another Elizabethan playwright, or Jacobean as he would be now with King James on the throne. This represented a workload twice as great as was typical under Elizabeth. So you can see just how much Shakespeare has thrown himself into persuading King James that Shakespeare supports him wholeheartedly, and you can see why he would be so motivated to write the play Macbeth as a direct result of the Gunpowder Plot, to try to show King James how loyal he is, but also as a piece of propaganda to get the country behind King James and to be so loyal to him, by pointing out how wonderful this ancestor was, Banquo, and also how important it was that we support the king, because when you assassinate a king, look what happens. Here's the story of Macbeth to warn you against such an assassination. The king's men, in fact, were so successful that they needed more men in 1604, and so they increased from 8 to 9, then 10, 11, and 12. The company gave 10 court performances in 1605 to 1606, and you'll remember that Macbeth was one of those at Hampton Court. Unusually, 3 court performances in the summer of 1606 during a state visit by the King of Denmark, and each court performance earned them £10, an absolutely massive figure in those days. They also toured that summer, and actually the king had to give permission for theatre companies to tour. It wasn't something they could just go off and do. They were in Oxford at the end of July, among other stops. 9 performances at court marked the winter of 1606 to 7. So we've got a historical record here that shows what a brilliant businessman Shakespeare was, in terms of getting his plays performed and getting the maximum amount of pay for them. We'll leave it with 1607 to 8 with 13 court appearances. So you can see how spectacularly successful he's been in increasing the number of performances over the years from 1603 to 1607. And one of the ways he does that is through this constant flattery of King James. So he included other enthusiasms of the king. We've already talked about the witches. So you will remember from my previous videos that King James had written about witchcraft this pamphlet called Demonology, where he was worried that people were actually starting to believe that witches didn't exist. And hopefully you'll also remember how he used characters' names from King James's past, David Seaton and Giles Duncan, in his naming of characters in Macbeth. Well, there are other ways that Shakespeare ingratiated himself with King James. So another book that King James had written was the Basilicon Doron, which looks at the theme of kinship. And in that book, James identifies the ideal king, which of course he's presenting himself as one who does his duty to God and to his country. And you'll see that reflected in how Duncan is presented by Macbeth. as godly, and he imagines that the angels will protest trumpet-tongued, so they will blast out Duncan's good name through heaven when he's killed, because Shakespeare is portraying this idea of how the king is appointed by God. So he's also a man of spotless personal integrity. Again, that's how James is portraying himself to the public. In the play, Shakespeare too explores this topic with the character of Malcolm representing the template of the ideal king. So there's this big scene with Malcolm where he pretends to be evil when he's testing Macduff, and that's all there to show that actually what a wonderful, good person Malcolm is. And that's dramatically a really boring scene, which is the reason it's often cut. But we can use that as evidence to say Shakespeare's just put that in to please King James. It actually doesn't work very well dramatically at all. Shakespeare would have known that. It's only there for propaganda to ingratiate himself with the way King James saw himself. And the other belief that's going on here is the belief in the divine right of kings, the idea that God actually appointed the king, and therefore to kill the king is actually to attack God. And that idea is very much present in the creation of Duncan in the play, and the concerns that Macbeth has about killing him. He lists all of Duncan's good qualities. And that's another way to remind the audience that their own king, King James, is just like Duncan, a really good, God-fearing and noble man. And then finally, there's this fantastic in-joke in the play where Shakespeare presents himself and his players as guardians of the king. And he does it in a really subtle way, which I love. So the players, remember, are the king's men. William Shakespeare belonged to the king's men, along with these other famous Elizabethans, now Jacobeans, famous actors, Lawrence Fletcher, Richard Burbage. You don't need all the names, but there are 9 of them, and listen to what they were called. They were cited by the name of grooms of the chamber. And this is exactly what Shakespeare has Macbeth and Lady Macbeth call the guards of King Duncan. They are the grooms of the second chamber. The king lies in the first chamber, and they are closest to the king, the grooms of the second chamber. And that's a deliberate reference by Shakespeare to his own company of players. And so what he's saying here is, look, I'm writing this play in order to protect you, King James. This play is an act of protection. We are your grooms. We're there to help you and to prevent you being assassinated like Duncan was. And I love that historical detail. And you can use that to show that Shakespeare was completely manipulative, and he's writing this totally as a political play in order to promote how wonderful James is, but also to therefore gain more power and influence and wealth himself, as we have seen. And there's a lot of evidence to back that up, because that's in fact what happened. He became much more successful under King James, even than he had been under Queen Elizabeth. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd want more, and good luck with your revision.